Alrighty guys, so we are, I think this is week 5. Actually, I think this is week 6. Yeah, I think we're in week 6 now, which is crazy. Alright, so for context purposes, we have moved past the bridge phase. If you've followed any of our other stuff on YouTube, more like the weekly vlogs, you'll know. But we have moved out of the bridging phase and now into week 2 of our aggressive phase. 5 days of 50 carbs, 65 fat, and 2 days of 400 carbs, 65 fat. So it's a very aggressive front end calorie approach. It's even the high days are not really touching the sides. It's more of just a simple glycogen replenishment to fuel training for the rest of the week. So I'm picking days like today, will be a higher carb day. I've got a big leg session tomorrow and I'll need to refuel from today's session. And then I'll do another high day on Saturday because I have legs on Sunday. So just making sure that I prefer to fuel up knowing that I train in the mornings. I don't like a big meal of food before I train. So having carbs the day before just helps that out. We dropped a total of 5.3 kilos in what would now actually be a week. So, sorry, not 5.3, Jesus, 3.3 kilos in a week. So, as to be expected, it's a very aggressive front end rate of loss. That will slow down eventually as things start to balance back out, but for now it's just a bit ahead. SCAF's plan is to not stay here permanently and do this the whole way. It'll be more of a 4 to 6 weeks, which, to be honest, day by day, it adds up, doesn't really make much of a difference in terms of like my hunger or energy and output. You just kind of go through it, tick the boxes. Everything's on track there. I'm due to go up and see Chrissy Black to start working on some posing as well. Bring that up to like 3 or 4 times a week. Today's session, we have an upper body session for once. I know how much you guys love hearing me groan and moan during leg days. We've got crucifix lateral raises, cable cuff lateral raises. We've got lat pull downs. We've got preacher curl, dips, and tricep extensions with some knee raises at the end. So just getting core activation and building some abs as well. Yeah, that's really where it is at the moment. Training hasn't really changed yet. There will be probably some compensation in load eventually with just simply the unavailability of food and body fat dropping. That is just naturally going to occur. So once that happens, you know, it kind of looks at how we maintain strength rather than trying to PR every single week. So for the most part now, strength got built up quite nicely before we started. The real dig and prep, incline presses were at a very solid position. RDLs are getting better. Pendulum is back up pretty decently after all of the hamstring issues. Hip flexor is getting a little bit tight, so I have to make sure we keep treating that. But for the most part, yeah, everything started off in a good position and now we get to enjoy the suck. So let's train. If you had to choose between tracking progress by photos or by weight, which would you pick? That's a tricky question. Given that majority of clients have some sort of body composition goal, I would probably pick photos. Weight, I think too many people place a moral value on what the weight scales, meaning it's good or bad, right or wrong, you know, whether they're a success or a failure, on the individual day. So they're very zoomed in, or a localized lens when looking at weight in tracking. When what it should be is more of a zoomed out, globalized view, looking at weekly data and trends, so that you can get an average of what's happening. Unfortunately, a lot of people can get caught up in the emotional attachment to whatever the scale says, use that to define themselves based on their value, their worth, whether or not they're successful or not. And whilst weight is a very accurate, very good indicator of what's happening overall, I think if it was to be one or the other, and I knew for a fact the client had their check-in photo location, the exact same, lighting was exactly the same time frame every week, I would probably just get double the photos per week and use that for a visual representation of what's happening over weight. Because with visualization, like visual cues, you can also use like, is clothing fitting better? Do you feel more comfortable? Little things like that to get an understanding of where they are or kind of what's happening. So I'd probably go with that just because of how emotional people can be. Now, if I had someone who genuinely understood the trend data of weekly average as opposed to the individual day, I may take weight. So that's a tricky one. Let's go with photos just to be stirring the pot. I'll take photos. Is creatine a steroid? Yes, mums, it is. No, it's not. Creatine is very safe. It is one of the most researched, well-backed supplements on the market. It is over the counter, it is legal. It is usable daily, it doesn't need to be cycled. It is just an effective supplement aid in training performance. There's even evidence now to suggest that it's improving cognitive function and sleep performance. So, is it a performance enhancing supplement? To a degree, sure. Is it a performance enhancing drug that is illegal? No, absolutely not. Absolutely no one will be banned, barred, or sick for taking creatine. There is no research that suggests that creatine has impacts on kidneys. That's usually people getting confused between creatinine levels and creatine levels. Take 5 to 10 grams a day per day, every single day, and don't miss. You don't need to load it. You don't need to do 20 grams for the first 7 days and then phase it out and pull down to 5. Just do 5 to 10 grams a day, every day, with whatever drink you're having. Pre-workout, post-workout, whatever, it doesn't matter. Creatine is very much legal. Now, for nuance's sake, is there supplementation that kids probably shouldn't take? Because most likely someone asking this question would be a mum or a dad who's read the worst health magazine possible, and some mum in the Daily Mail has complained that creatine killed her kid. I promise you it didn't. Seeing 12, 13-year-olds smashing down Bang cans or pre-workout mixes and things like that, is it necessary? No. I've coached youngsters, I've coached kids as young as 12 to 13, and they don't touch a single drop of caffeine in a day. So the idea that a 12 to 13-year-old needs to start life with a caffeine hit or train with a caffeine hit is just baffling to me, especially as they're coming to peak testosterone levels, peak hormone cycles. So yes, do be considerate of supplementation we're taking, but creatine is not one of them to be concerned about. In fact, the sooner the better. You can probably start that and have positive effects. What strategies can help overcome the fear of heavy lifting? I promise most of the time, people that are worried about heavy lifts being scary often aren't training that heavy where I'd be concerned with things like blowouts. Not to say you shouldn't pay attention to your form, but I mean, a good friend of ours, Paul Waneed, did both of his knees in a powerlifting meet, and I was pushing 1 rep maxes on a day where it's complete central nervous system stimulation, overload, the body's just about to explode. He unfortunately did both of his knees. But for the most part, when it comes to heavy lifting, this is why it's important to progressively overload, structure your training, and consistently build proof. I've spoken about it before. confidence or anxiety, for example, like fear of lifting would be an anxiety of lifting, anxiety of something happening, anxiety of something going wrong. So there's an angst about the movement. Anxiety is often a perception of not having the weapons to deal with the initial threat. For a lot of the time, that's most people. So if we look at that in the context of heavy lifting, you're worried you don't have the abilities or tools to deal with the threat that is the heavy lift. For a degree of neural arousal, we do want to perceive that lift as a threat. It is something that you do need to like prime your body to lift and aggressively attack. So how do you do that? You build confidence in your movement mechanics, in your load bearing abilities, and your ability to execute by doing it over time and getting better and better at it. Going from never squatting to a 1 rep max, looking at a 200 kilo squat when you've never done it before, is a surefire way to build up fear of training and a fear of not being able to do the movement. So I counteract this by putting people on machines first, drive failure, have them prove that the machine is safe. Once someone has the perception and understanding the machine is designed to be safely executed, it becomes a lot easier to have them mentally get in the preparation to drive heavy lifting and also understand it's not going to hurt them. Mistakes can happen, obviously accidents can happen. Load can just simply create the environment at which a tear or a break occurs. I would argue there's a lot of things that go into that for that to happen before that day, but for the sake of a newbie or someone getting around the fear of a new heavy lift, I believe there should be some degree of fear, a degree of arousal, anxiety that is driving you to be worked up and tense, and make sure the body is primed to lift. But getting under machines that you have a track record to prove that you can execute, are confident with the load and progress it over time, is a great way to build that confidence, remove that fear. Use the machines to execute to failure so that you have a history of going to failure and knowing that you aren't hurt. And then from that, if you're looking at like a deadlift or you're looking at a squat or something like that, use that proof to show that you've done the movement before, you've worked your way up to it, you have a history of doing loads similar to it, and then obviously progressing that load over time. And that should pretty well tame the fear of moving, or fear of lifting weights. There are more than enough people that have injuries, tears, breaks, rips, that have come back and retrained the same movement because they loved it. So, just keep that in mind. How do I avoid comparing myself to others in the gym? Controversial opinion. I don't think that you do for the most part. Anyone that thinks that they're going to walk into a gym and have no competitive or comparative instinct, I think is to a degree lying to themselves. This whole notion that you should never have comparison or you should never look to anything, I think is an absolute crock of shit. There is comparison for progress, there is comparison as landmarkers, there's comparison for checkpoints, then there's comparison for self-defeat and negative self-critique and negative self-talk. What you're using comparison for will dictate how you respond to it and how you feel about it. Should you focus on your own performances? Absolutely. But I have used checkpoints and markers comparing to other people since I started training. There was people in positions in sports that I played that I wanted to be. Again, comparison. Where was this person when I was at this age? What were they doing at this age? How could I have been like them at this age? There's an episode of The Simpsons where Homer wants to out-invent Thomas Edison. And he realized that in his pursuit of Thomas Edison and being upset that Thomas Edison was a better inventor than him, Thomas Edison had found something, he'd found something similar in Thomas Edison's room that was him comparing himself to Da Vinci. So we need to stop looking at this idea that comparison is wrong. We have what is called upwards and downward social comparison through social comparison theory. And a lot of the time, people will only compare themselves up to talk themselves down, and they will compare themselves down to talk themselves up. I use comparison up to look at where I need to be and where I need to, how it can be better in people that are in relative fields that I want to be in. So I'm not going to compare myself to The Rock and be upset that I'm not the world's best wrestler. I have no interest in wrestling. My spine couldn't handle it. But when you go comparing yourself to people in different lanes with different arbitrary success profiles, I think that's when you're creating an environment of negativity and self-defeat. So having an idea of what you want to look like, or how your lifts might be, or a powerlifter absolutely has to compare themselves, because if you're competing to win, you are comparing your numbers to someone else. If you are a bodybuilder, yes, you should focus on building your best physique and bringing up your weaknesses and enhance your strengths, learn to pose properly, but you are by definition comparing yourself to other bodybuilders on stage through the sheer criteria of judging. So I think it's a load of shit when people play the idea that you shouldn't judge yourself in the gym. The other part of that is you can use comparison to compare yourself to past versions of you and future versions of you. Who was I 12 months ago? Who was I 2 years ago? Who am I going to be in 12 months' time? Who am I going to be in 5 years' time? That is all comparison. So it's how you use the tool. The idea that comparison is only negative is a moral position that we have applied to a skill or a thought process that is otherwise neutral depending on the context you apply it. So learn how to compare properly and it'll make a drastic difference. Comparing to everyone and anything just because you're negatively defeating yourself and have a negative sense of self is something you have to work on. What are the mental and physical impacts of overtraining? Another opinion, that's what all of these are really, is most people are not overtraining, they're under recovering. The idea to me that like a novice lifter with next to no history of training is overtraining is likely not occurring. The body is very adaptive. However, like people overthink, overcomplicate when it comes to overtraining. Instead of just looking at like your recovery metrics, adequate food, adequate sleep, mobility work, stretching, things like that, adequate time off, meaning like the amount of training volume you're doing per week, are you taking adequate or sufficient days in between to rest and reduce fatigue? That is what's likely leading to overtraining. But for the most part, people aren't overtraining, they're under recovering. So when that's occurring, what you're looking at is the physical and psychological effects of what that overtraining or under recovering starts to build up to over time. It's not something that's going to happen on a per session basis or like from day 1 to day 2 all of a sudden you're overtraining. It's more of an accumulation of fatigue, exhaustion, training intensity and volume over the course of weeks at a time. So when that happens, you find generally a decrease in motivation, even in some cases struggles to sleep, increases in stress hormone profiles. You'll generally find more of an arousal, like a wired sense or feeling. You struggle to sleep, you struggle to relax the body. Appetite, what else is there? Soreness recovering from session to session, from week to week seems to be down. The ability to drive stimulus decreases, so like you're getting to a certain point where a wall is hit, almost like a plateau. What that is indicating is not that you're at so much as a plateau, but more that you require a period of time off. Let the body recover, rest, relax, de-escalate, de-stress, then go again. Again, it's not overtraining, it is under recovering and then struggling to equate for accumulated volume over time. So I would say your recovery modalities and systems, meaning your training program, meaning volume in that program, needs to be equated for more precisely, and look at how you're taking time off to recover between sessions or between weeks. And then with that, how are you tracking your volume over each week and how do you know when it's time to pull back? Are you tracking these metrics so that you can see that things are stagnating or starting to build up? And then it becomes very clear when someone is under recovered and it's time for a deload. Generally that accumulation of fatigue, accumulation of volume adds up, everything starts to get sore, joints get sore, inflammation increases, and the body struggles. Mentally you seem to struggle, mentally motivation goes down, the desire to push those loads gets worse and worse, and eventually it'll probably stop. So yeah, you start to see some indicators and some metrics that as proxy will indicate under recovering. And I guess you could interchange that with overtraining for the most part is the way people understand it, but I would argue that it's more under recovering than it is overtraining. If you had to pick a single exercise for improving posture, what would it be? A single exercise. I would probably pick something like a trap bar deadlift. If you look at the way the trap bar is designed, you can get full retraction of the shoulder. Most people's posture isn't bad, it's just that they get stiff and tight from sitting forward, being in spinal flexion. There's argument for or against getting rounded shoulders from phone use and things like that. You know, we are the first, probably long-term generation that will have this problem. So I'll be curious to see how that looks in 20, 50 years, but you know, there's also evidence to suggest that it's not really a major concern, just stand up with your shoulders back and straighten up. But yeah, something like a trap bar deadlift, I think, getting people into that retracted tall position, hips under, chest tall, shoulders back and down. You know, the trap bar gets into that very good postural position. So even if it's just as a reminding tool more than a corrective tool, I would use something like a trap bar like that, an RDL. Getting a lot of the time, less of a postural issue, more of a loading issue. A lot of people will load the anterior, right? They spend a lot of time training things they can see. They haven't developed the sufficient training knowledge or training literacy to connect and feel to movements in the back. So doing something like the posterior movements, a trap bar, deadlift, an RDL, off the ground, is a very good way to work the entire posterior chain basically to some degree, or most of it, and add some stimulus to an area that most people probably neglect. So for the average lay person, that'll probably be the exercise I choose. If you had to pick 3 leg exercises to do forever, which would it be and why? Ooh, trying to catch me out. 3 exercises that I would pick. A full knee flexion movement. So a squat pattern with the ability to get full knee flexion and full range of motion, so that you are for the rest of your life moving through a complete range and under load. Probably something like a pendulum or a hack squat for that. Or if I really want to be a piece of shit, something like a Bulgarian to also build stability, single leg stability. 2 would be a posterior chain hinge. So that could be a Smith machine deadlift, a barbell deadlift, RDL, dumbbell RDL. It could be a single leg, a B stance, contralateral B stance. They would all be perfectly sufficient. Any one of those would do. Just make sure you do both sides, obviously. And then, depending on weaknesses, I would probably also include either a 45-degree hip extension, focusing on glute drive, or depending on the person's genetics, like more of a complete build of the legs, something like a calf movement, just to maintain flexion and extension in the calves and the legs, but also just a overall complete package. If it's someone that already has good calves, it'd be selecting a accessory exercise that would build the weakness and complement the strength. So if someone has more predominant quads, I'd probably look at adding a hamstring curl. If someone has very sufficient hamstrings, I would probably look at adding a leg extension. Something that I can drive adequate volume without generating a ton of fatigue. So yeah, that'd be the 3. Let's just narrow it down and say pendulum. I really like the range of motion the pendulum gets. A Smith machine RDL so that I can preserve fatigue on the lower back. You could even add a deficit in there if you wanted to, just to really improve that range of motion and reduce overall load requirement. And because it's me and I just want bigger quads, a leg extension. What role does visualization play for beginners? I guess it would depend on the context or sport. But if we're going to look at like neuroplasticity, early on, the premise of a lot of movement programming is to try and drive early neurological adaptation so that the body gets used to or understands the thing that is happening. So like, movement mechanics, right? Under load, early on in people's programming, the adaptations that really occur very early on in terms of strength and movement is neurological adaptation. The body is getting more efficient at moving, using the right neural pathways and connections to drive stimulus and signaling. The place where we can use visualization there to try and improve that process is visualization can be used to very much enhance the drive of neural development and connection to a process. So if we're talking about movements, getting a slow, precise execution and visualizing what's happening as you're doing it, being present in the movement, is a very easy technique to use to enhance skill acquisition, motor coordination, and obviously learning to drive and connect stimulus to the target muscle. So I have clients usually start at the very beginning, slow movements down, 3 to 5 second eccentrics. I'm not a time and attention guy, but more so I use that controlled movement sequence to connect with the movement, connect with the muscle, especially when they aren't used to visualize and understand what's happening. Try and get them to picture like an electrical signal being passed from line to line or power pole to power pole as it moves down the body to get to the location it needs to get to, from the power station to your house. So from the brain, where is the signal going? What is the neural pathways being moved? How do you use that? Other ways, especially during back movements, is trying to close your eyes and visualize what people call the mind-muscle connection. Visualize the muscle that is being required to lift the movement, or what is the limiting factor, and visualize that muscle contracting and moving through its range of motion. So a lat, we're going this way, the lat is contracting and pulling back, almost like it's tucking the seat belt around from the opposite shoulder to the opposite hip. Things like that, where you can use cues to visualize what's happening and try and develop an even greater connection to that movement, is going to help you build greater understanding and pathways. Okay. No, you do. Don't be sorry. And that's how we can kind of use visualization as a beginner technique for lifting. Things get more advanced when it comes to advanced arousal techniques, visualization techniques for emotional anchoring, that sort of thing. I use several of those when it comes to, optimal arousal prior to intense lifts or heavy lifts. But yeah, for the most part, for a beginner, we're looking at visualization to connect to the movement, connect the body to what's happening, try and build that psychosomatic relationship so that your thoughts and your body start to become a synchronized process. Okay, something I wanted to touch on more as a talking point, something to think about, get the old noggin firing. The quote someone sent me, they shared, Freud is quoted as saying, and I want to get this right because it's fucking important. Freud said once in retrospect, the struggle will strike you as most beautiful. And I added to that, this person, we had a bit of a conversation back and forth about it, is people don't appreciate that one of the great parts about struggle is that it builds an integral part of your story and who you are. Anyone who goes through life having never struggled anything is someone that I pity, because they'll never learn to grow and become the best version of themselves through obstacles, hard work, and resilience. There is a certain degree of evolution that occurs due to stress and deliberate exposure to stress. The hard part, and this is where the conversation got interesting, or I believe it more, I guess on a deeper level, is that it's hard for most people to look at the struggle during the time it's occurring as a beautiful thing and becoming part of who they are. It is, as Freud said, in retrospect, where we most perceive the struggle as beautiful. So a key piece of advice, and it's something that Stoics meditate on a lot and they preach a lot in their writing, is to be present in the moment and accept all things as they are. Amor fati is a belief that we are the lover of, to be a lover of fate, meaning that things will happen as they should happen and all things will occur as they should, and you should learn to love them accordingly on the fact that it can or will happen, not that you did or didn't like it, or that it was good or bad. So find a way in the moment of the struggle or the obstacle to look at this and say, this is where I'm supposed to be, this is what is supposed to happen, and I'm going to get better because of it. It is one of the hardest things to do, but yet it's one of the most insightful, self-developing practices that you can possess. It took a lot of mental work, frustration, anguish, anger, depression, sadness, grief, when I was in my car accident, and it had to be looked at for me as a challenge to grow and become better than the incident itself, instead of allowing the incident to consume me and eventually lead to taking my life. So understanding that the struggle in the moment is a good thing, even when it feels like it's not, will drastically change your life and the integration of those struggles into your story and who you become. Just something to think about. How can I use cognitive reframing to overcome performance anxiety? Ooh, let's think about this one in the sense of performance anxiety. So cognitive reframing, really, what we're trying to do is change internal language to reappraise the situation and reduce the perception of the threat. So in the sense of anxiety, I mean. So how we're doing that is looking at when we initially start to what I call system one, our default automatic self-talk response or cognitive response, visual response, depending on whether you're a visual auditory thinker or a visual thinker, is what is that initial response you're using that generates? And usually if it's something in the sense of performance anxiety, it will be a doubt. It will be a fear, it will be a concern, and it will usually be trying to identify or isolate something in yourself that you can't do, or that perhaps you'll lose, or you're not going to be good enough, etc. This is a default position. So you have to consciously work against that and reframe the scenario, reframe the situation. In a growth environment, an easy one is add the word yet. I am not ready yet. I cannot do this yet. I struggle with this, I can't do it yet, I can't implement this yet. There is always a way to kind of set it up as a this will soon be, but it is not right now, that is okay. In the sense of performance anxiety, we need to reframe towards a I am good enough, this can be done, I can do it, where you're probably or likely currently implementing a this can't be done, I can't do it strategy. It is almost like a self-preservation mechanic or mechanism that is designed to protect you and stop you from doing something dangerous, risky that you're scared of. Unfortunately, in the sense of performance, we don't want to have that. We want to be confident in our ability and our approach that it can get done. Even if you have the skills and abilities, there still may be a lingering part of you that has that sense of internal anxiety or fear. We need to reword that. We need to restructure it, reframe it. Changing the dialogue, the dialect, the visual cue to look at something that you can do. Look at it as something that can be done, something you've done in the past. Find or anchor to a similar experience that you've completed, that you've engaged with, that you've done competently. Use that as your capability criteria. I have done this here, I can do this. This is nothing new, this is nothing different. I have done this before, I have a previous history of this, I have a track record of this. My report, my history is unquestionable. This is easy, I've done it before. Anything like that where you're going to rephrase or reframe the circumstance situation to something more positive is going to help you control that anxiety and believe that you can do it. So in the sense of performance anxiety, we want just enough where it arouses us, gets us wired, gets a neural stimulus occurring and intention to engage, but not so much that it tips us and we become nervous, concerned, worried, and we're thinking more about failing than we are about the sport or the activity. So look at cognitive reappraisal from that sense, or reframing, and use that to reframe the situation so that you are positive in your ability to complete it. What is one tip to get through the holiday period? Well, very context dependent, but the biggest tip that I would probably have that'll consider most of the other strategies that I use is pick the one day that means the most. The biggest problem that I find with most people, especially in Western cultures, America, Australia, Britain, the holiday period is this day is a holiday, this day is a holiday, this day is a holiday, so blow it out, the whole thing is a holiday, therefore it doesn't matter. We use the justification or the crux that it's a holiday, so enjoy yourself. And then every day becomes a holiday, so enjoy yourself. And then it may as well be the final quarter of the year is just a holiday, so why bother dieting, training, tracking, being accountable whatsoever. Pick the one day or the one event or the few events that actually matter to you and what you want to achieve on that day, on that holiday, or in that holiday period, and use that as the day where you're going to relax. Justifying, especially if you're someone like in America, Thanksgiving, Halloween, Labor Day, you've got Black Friday, you've got Christmas, New Year's, Boxing Day, New Year's Eve. God, what else is in there? We've got a bunch of holidays. You start getting into work holidays, Christmas holidays, work Christmas parties, different family Christmases and things like that. All these things start to combine to make a total of weeks worth of holidays, and people use that to justify blowing out and throwing the baby with the bathwater. So for me, the easiest tip that accommodates probably most of the strategies I use that would then just be nuanced on the day is pick the day or the few days that actually matter to you and what you want to spend your time doing and enjoying, and use that as the primary day that you relax on the diet or relax on the training or relax on the workload, and then pick it back up straight afterwards. Chances are if you eat good enough and eat good enough food and eat enough food on Christmas Day, then Boxing Day is going to be one hell of a training session. So that's probably like the biggest tip I would use to get through the holiday period. Just stop using the excuse that every day is a holiday, therefore it doesn't matter. Or that just relax, because if you're gonna relax on every day, then every day doesn't matter, and what's the point anyway? And I find that there is generally more psychological enjoyment when I've worked hard for a day or an event that I want to enjoy than if I just simply think that every single day is a day to blow out and relax on. Alrighty, so that is training vlog 1 of 2 for December done. We'll do a bit more of an in-depth Christmas or holiday type training vlog on the next one. Attack more of those concepts and strategies and stuff you can use for the Christmas period. As you said, keep an eye out for New Year. We've closed the books for the remainder of December, but we'll be opening back up for inquiries and interviews to join the team for 2025, coming into the first of the new year. So if you are waiting, if you are interested, keep an eye out for that. Go fill in the inquiry form on the website, express interest, first in, best dressed. I'm not someone who's going to sit there and post like 5 spots left. We all know they have 20 spots left. It's just a matter of getting sorted who's first interested or been waiting, and we'll open that back up on the 1st of January. But yeah, for right now, keep following along. We're going to keep the weekly episodes coming out, the training vlog only is coming out, podcast, YouTube content, etc., etc. So make sure you are subscribed, following, like, leave a comment if there's any stuff you want us to talk about during the training sessions, if there's any stuff you want us to do for vlogs, if there's any stuff you want to see, more food strategies, things like that. Let us know, and we'll strive to put it into the content. So yeah, that's it.